Hello, hello.
Good morning. We are Vic and Jules, and today we'll be doing a Risograph demo with the Phx Zine Fest.
We are a local Arizona design studio. Some of you may know us as Saturn Hex, our art and apparel brand. We've recently started Softxjaws to encompass the larger scope of our work. We've grown into a small modern-day printing press, offering small batch screen printing, 3D printing, vinyl cutting, and now Risograph printing services.
Yeah, this is our first Zine Fest, and we're super excited to participate. Wasted Ink Distro has been such a vital part of our growth, and we're so happy to continue working with the zine community. So today we'll talk about what a risograph is, how we use it, and how you can get started making prints and zines and anything that you can think of. So, what is riso? A risograph is a digital duplicator. Digital duplication is a printing method designed for a high volume printing and can be high speed, reliable, and energy and cost efficient printing solution. We like to call it a mix between traditional and digital printmaking. So an image is digitally scanned, and then a screen is made on a color drum that ink is pushed through like screen printing. It's different than a copier or printer because it doesn't use heat to apply ink. Risograph is a specific brand of machines created by Riso Kagaku Corporation in Japan in 1980. So like how a square is a rectangle, a risograph is a digital duplicator, but there are other brands of machines like Ricoh and Duplo. Ink drums are designated a specific color, and machines can have one or two drums. Riso uses spot color by playing with opacity and layering colors and density, so you can get many different results. So what's inside a riso? And what are we talking about when we say these weird terms? So here's a general diagram of what is inside a riso. The original is your art that we scan in the scanner bed. The scanner is what digitizes your art and sends it to be burned. The thermal head is what burns the image of your art onto the rice paper masters. This goes on the drum. The ink drum is the powerhouse of the the risograph. This is what makes your art. The ink cartridge goes in the drum, and then the drum pumps ink from it. Paper trays are on either side of the risograph, so you can put paper in, goes through the drum, and pew, goes out the other side. So, why use riso? We consider riso to be an emerging technology. Most people think that that's something that's new, but it can also include older technologies that were either underutilized or repurposed in another field. Most risographs are acquired secondhand. Our machine is from a local school district and sat unused since 2005. And since you're watching this demo, we can all acknowledge that there has been an emergence of artists using this process and pushing its potential. Yeah, so a little bit about how we use riso. As an illustrator, I always struggled to find a medium that I felt like was mine. I always struggled between like having a digital and traditional style and like trying to find the best way to convey my art style, my process, and storytelling. When I found out what Riso was, like, I knew that I finally found the medium that, like, is the medium for me. Before we acquired our machine, we took a workshop with Bad Student, a Riso press in the Philippines that actually does super phenomenal work. And their values like coincided with ours and how we've taught people in the past, like how to use technology. So they saw the Risograph printing process as collaborative and emphasized the sharing of knowledge to continue building the Risograph community. When we do that, it only moves forward and grows if we put in the effort to share and uplift each other and not like gatekeep. So that's what we're doing here. So we've used a Risograph to make art prints, art books, packaging, merchandise, prototyping. Really into notepads right now. But yeah, I'm personally really excited to finally make art that has been on like the back burner for me for years, and that I'm really glad to be able to do that now with Riso. So before we prepare our files, we have to prepare ourselves for the naturally occurring quirks of risograph printing. The first quirk is that it uses uncoated paper. Pretty much it's not the paper that's used for toner or inkjet printers, and has more of a tooth and not a coating. Risograph ink is soy-based, so it's made from soybeans. Since the process does not involve heat, it will never fully dry. This doesn't mean that your prints will be runny. It means that they will smudge and then pick up if not handled correctly. Smudging can occur by touching inks that haven't been fully dried, or through pressure, as can happen with like roller tracks from the machine. So if you know you're printing something that's like got a lot of like red or blue or darker colors, then like plan for that to be a longer print that takes a couple of days than if you were using lighter colors. It's always a good practice to clean the tires between each print, especially the more layers that you put down and then the darker colors that you put. But in a place like Arizona, prints dry fairly quickly. You really only need overnight to dry as much as they will, especially with like higher density colors and really dark colors like red and blue. And since the inks don't ever fully dry, you can always erase any of these marks that come up with like a normal kneaded eraser or like a rubber eraser. But yeah, all of this can be minimized by adjusting your artwork, cleaning your rollers and feeders during printing, and then applying a workable fixative to prints post-production. And then the other big quirk is misalignment, or happy accidents, as a great artist has said. So yeah, misalignment is a normal part of the printing process and pretty much accepted in the Riso community as an added quirk or personality to your print. The more passes and colors you do, the higher chance of misalignment in your prints. But yeah, just keep those in mind. It's always fun to have a little bit of a challenge whenever you're working with art. So with all those quirks in mind, we'll go ahead and prepare our art for printing. So your art can be digital or traditional, pretty much as long as it fits in our scanner bed, you're good to go. Each machine is going to be different. So more modern machines will have a PC card. So what that means is they're able to connect their machine directly to a computer and send files that way as you would a regular printer. Our machine is a bit older. So what we do is we prepare our files digitally for the most part and then print them out on cardstock and then run them to the scanner. It's a bit of an extra step, but I feel that it it's perfectly fine and gives you a bit more chance to be intentional with the outcome of your print. So for our workshop today, I'll go ahead and show you how to prepare for our machine, which is an EZ220. The EZs, especially the 220s, are definitely on the smaller side of risographs, but works perfectly fine for us, and yeah, pretty easy to get started. So before you think about your art itself, you want to think about the capabilities of the risograph. Each machine is different, but each machine is going to be bound by its paper size and its print area. So by paper size, what we mean is the maximum and minimum size paper that can run through the machine. And that also includes thickness. Since the machine is high volume, there is a chance for paper jams. So that's just something that you want to be aware of, and that you are working within a specific range. So our machine maximum can take 11 by 17 sized paper. And then minimum, if you're curious, is 3 by 5. We haven't worked at something that small. We're generally working within the 8.5 by 11 size paper, or also known as A4. And that's just because it's something that's familiar, easier to source, and then also just easier to handle. The next thing that you want to think about is print area. And then the print area is going to be determined by the drum. So each drum is given a specific size. All our drums are letter size, so that's going to be what our print area is. And even though we are working in that 8.5 by 11 sized paper, it doesn't have a full bleed, so we're not going to get an edge-to-edge coverage on an A4. The actual real boundary is going to be 7.75 by 10.25 inches. So I haven't worked completely fully in this like full range, but I have done a print pretty recently that did take advantage of that full margin, and it came out beautifully. So that is something that you can get. So with paper size and print area in mind, in general, we don't recommend that you run your paper, more than 3 to 4 times, through the machine. And by passes, we mean actual physical times it's running through the machine. So if you have 4 colors that you want to use, just be aware that your paper is running through 4 times per color. A good starting point for Riso is 2 colors. It's easy to handle, and sort of easier for you to start thinking about how to layer those colors. And yeah, I think the maximum I know for sure the maximum I've used is 4 colors, and I've never really felt the need to need more colors, just because of the range that I can get from layering and like opacity with the colors that I have. All right, so we will move on to colors, what everyone is always excited about, myself included. So we have 5 colors dedicated to our machine. Drums are going to be the largest expense and investment when you have a risograph. But I feel that, the colors that we have, you're able to get a very wide range. They're simple enough and close enough to primary colors that you can, get close enough to the color that you want, without it being that actual direct color. So we have sunflower, fluorescent pink, scarlet, blue, and sea. Sunflower is going to be a warmer sort of yellow. Fluorescent pink is going to be very vibrant and definitely sort of that characteristic Riso pop color. Scarlet is more of a, closer to a primary red, definitely very bright. And blue is going to sort of mirror that. It's very bright and definitely very primary. And then sea definitely has its own vibe for sure. It's going to be more of like a navy, maybe more of like a Prussian blue. And there is definitely a difference between blue and sea. The numbers that we have up here, the hex and CMYK numbers, this is really more for you to decide how your mock-up looks like, because when we print it out on cardstock, your art, as well as when the machine scans it, it's going to scan it in black and white and print it out through the color drum, and the color drum is what determines what your color is. Just from having worked digitally and then being able to see the colors print, I know the difference, and it's really more of just a guide for how I want to set up my file. So with that in mind, since we do have a varying amount of colors, we do have a preference for how we want to print, and we do have a print order. So we will always print the lightest color first, And that's primarily so that the darker colors don't stain the lighter drums. We do want to make sure that we preserve them since they are a larger investment. Kind of like if you coloring with like a yellow marker, in kindergarten, and it brushed against like blue ink, it would like take on the color of the blue and change it green. And that's really kind of the same principle here. Cool. With that being said, I also have included a list of different software with different price points, with the best price point being free. I use quite a few of these different software in tandem with each other to create my art. You do not have to do that. Definitely, Illustrator, Photoshop is what it is. But Clip Studio Paint can actually mimic a lot of the things that those two do. It does have a $50 price point on it, but it does go on sale very frequently for like $25, and I got it. It has a tablet app as well too, so I use that kind of interchangeably, and then it also can do raster and vector graphics. And then something I want to point out also is Spectralite. It's completely free. It's a software built just for the Mac, but also just to set up Risograph files. So you can choose your colors and you can do your color separation in there as well too. All completely free. So definitely give that a shot. All right, so we are going to go ahead and get our art prepared for Riso. So like I said earlier, if your art is digital, there's a little bit more preparation that you can do, just so that you're setting yourself up for success when you print. But with that being said, I always think it's kind of a surprise. You don't ever really know what your art will look like until it actually, comes out of the machine. But yeah, there's like a few tips that you can do to prepare your art. So I'm going to show you two different types of files, a raster file and a vector file. And mostly it really just comes out to the software that you're using when you're preparing them. If you don't know the difference between a raster and a vector file, primarily it is how like the computer generates the file. So if you're working in Photoshop and you're like sketching and drawing something by hand, or working as like a picture, that's going to be something that's raster. So when you have that as like a set size and you try and make it bigger and it's more pixelated, that is a raster file. A vector file is going to be something that's generated by the computer. So no matter how big or small you scale that file, it will always maintain the same resolution. And then that's usually something that's more simplified and tends to have like shapes and is done in like a software like Illustrator. So for today, my raster file is going to be this pineapple. I think that pineapples look like they have eyes. I'm very, very sorry if you have a phobia of eyes. That is something that exists in this house. But yeah, when I work on raster files, or I guess vector files too, usually if I know an art that I'm working on or a piece I'm working on, I'm going to print it out with the Riso. I already start designing it with that in mind and start thinking about the color separations and thinking about the colors that I'm going to work with. So when I had envisioned this, I had envisioned it with just one color, C, but then I started thinking about bringing in pink and having like the eyes and maybe even the pineapple top like popping out a little bit more and having a bit more color vibrancy to it. So that being said, I will go ahead and turn these off. So like I like to start with my like final sketch, and if I already know, like I said, I'm printing it out, then I will already start making my final lines with those color separations and working like that. So C, I have separated into 2 layers, and this is just because it gives me more flexibility with how I'm designing. With a raster file, it's going to be, I would definitely suggest that you have as many separations as you can, and then put them into folders as that like main color, so that if you ever needed to go back, say you printed it and it didn't come out, if you ever need to go back, that's something that we can adjust on its own. Or if you send your file to us, that's something that I can adjust like on the back end and make sure that your file does look like how you want it to look. So these lines, I worked with a brush that did not have any, pen sensitivity, any opacity sensitivity. It's pretty much just like a 100%. That's what I know, what I want that to look like. Whereas I know I wanted to bring in some colors. So I made a separate layer where I worked with a different brush that had that variation in like pressure and opacity. So this is something that I can always adjust. Just from looking at some palettes that I've made, I already knew that this is kind of around a 60-70% and does have kind of like a little bit of a gradient. Working here in this top layer, I know that this is essentially 100%, so I can always drop it down here in my densities and see, or opacities, and see like, oh hey, this can match the color that I'm working on with like the print palette. Whereas this one starts at 100, but it's kind of varying and kind of gives me that. Oops, sorry, this one. But I'm pretty happy with how that turns out. And then when I printed it, it was fine. So with pink, what I did was kind of hand drew that in. The pink has three more layers, and these are all different. So we will break that down. So with the pink, we have the eyes in there. And I knew that that was the same brush as the main layer, so it's 100% for me, and that's something that I can adjust. And then coloring that in, I dropped that down to 60, but I can always bring it and adjust it to what I need to if I wasn't happy with the contrast. So that's at 60%. And then something tricky was a gradient. Gradients are pretty tricky. I haven't quite nailed it down, but I will say that it did come out pretty well. When you're making a gradient, what I like to do is make sure that when I'm setting them up, try and have it as close to like 100% as possible. And you can always make that a layer, another layer, and adjust that again if we needed to. But yeah, like I said, the most important thing is just making sure you have your individual colors separated. Anything else, can kind of be adjusted on the fly, or like as a whole as well too, with the individual folders. But I'm happy with how I have these separations and each individual layer, so we'll go ahead and prepare that. So if you want to go ahead and send your file off to me like this, or off to us like this, that's perfectly fine. What I will do on my end, even if you already had it separated as black, is I will go ahead and turn it into CMYK black, which is cyan 0, magenta 0, yellow 0, and then the K, which is black, will be 100. You don't have to do this. This is on my end, my printer, and printing off on the cardstock. Like, this is what gives me the best control for when I scan it on the bed of the Riso. So if I'm happy with that, what you can do is you can merge all of your blue, all of your C to one layer, all of your pink to one layer. But then again, if I want to go in and adjust those separate like qualities of them, that prevents me from doing that. So what Clip Paint or Clip Studio Paint has very handily is I'm able to change the color of the line to drawing. So what it does is on every layer, it changes the color to exactly what I want it to be. So I can go ahead and change that to our CMYK black. So everything there on that layer is already the CMYK black and the opacity that I want it to be. So we'll go ahead and do that with our pink as well. And I can go ahead and change that color. Oh, I'm so sorry, my menu just don't come up. But if you go to edit, and then in there it says change color of line to drawing. It does not appear on here, but that is an option that makes it super handy. So now that I have my colors separated, I can go ahead and print these. But I wanted these to be mini prints. I didn't want this to be a huge guy. So what I went ahead and did was I just rotated my paper size or orientation, and then I just made them smaller. But in here, I still have my same individual color separation. So each folder here is one pineapple. So if I wanted to have a variation, if I wasn't sure what my colors came out, I can have this be like way lighter or darker and play around with that there. It also, splitting up your art into smaller prints, kind of maximizes your like print capability. So if you didn't want huge 8.5 by 11s, you wanted like 5 by 7s or whatever half of this is, you can always like shrink your art down and you can maximize like your number of prints. So if we did, this is one sheet, you're getting 2 prints instead of 1 print. Yeah, and so then when I print on my end, is I just turn off my layers. So that's all the art that will be C. So I go ahead and print that out. It comes out as one sheet like this. And then turn that off and then go ahead and print pink. What I forgot to do when I printed them was I forgot to do registration marks. Since I know these are very large, I can line them up by eye. But if you weren't sure, you can always come in and add registration marks, as you'll see with the vector file. So that guy is all set and ready to print. And I have my files here ready to edit if I needed to, and I was unhappy with anything that came out on the other end. Oh, yes, it's also worth mentioning, so you can either work in RGB mode or CMYK mode. It does not matter on your end, it matters on the printer's end. So when I am printing your originals, I'll go ahead and bring it over to CMYK. RGB mode is mostly meant for working on screens, and then CMYK mode is mostly working for print. And since we are printing these out, they will be in CMYK mode. If you're working in Clip Studio Paint, you know, you can always export your file or save it as a duplicate, and it gives you different file formats. So a .clip format, if you're working in this, works fine, as well as a JPEG, a PNG. You can even save it as a Photoshop document, even if you did not have Photoshop. So that works pretty well. All right, so now we are moving on to our vector files. And this is primarily just to show you the difference between the two when setting up a raster and a vector file. I find raster files to be a bit more difficult to set up, but once you go in knowing like, hey, I have to separate my files or my colors and maintain that separation, then I would say, you know, that transfers over to like the vectors, and like that's kind of like the mindset that you need when you're setting up your files. So with vector, it's going to be, I would say, easier in that you have more control with the opacity levels, and then setting things up. With raster and like the pineapple, I already kind of had to start thinking that, or knowing that I was going to print it, whereas with vectors, I can kind of play around, I can kind of build in here before, and create before I like fully decide what like it's going to look like. So I'm working in Illustrator. Again, you do not have to work in Illustrator. There are plenty of other vector software that is free that has the exact same capabilities and can save and export in the exact same file types. So the file that we're working on is going to be our business cards for Saturn Hex. You may have seen them floating around. I really like how tactile they are. But it's a file that we print on the Riso very frequently, and in large amounts, as well as something that we can experiment on if we wanted to. So we can always change the colors up, or like we just did recently with this new design here. This was the original up here. Kind of experiment and still maintain, keep the same style, and change one or two things here. So this, we'll go ahead and work on these two bottom ones. So this was always the back. This will be the new front, and this was the original front. This was a design that we were working on that we did not like as much as this other one. Yeah, so you'll see that I have, I'm going to zoom out here, the colors set up, but it's also, like I mentioned earlier, you don't need to work in the color that you're going to print in, because you might change it. And also, we don't print in that color. From like your originals, we print it out in black and white. So what I like to do is set up how the alignment is going to be, and I'll just go ahead and set it up here. What I didn't do with the pineapples is make registration marks. So up here at the top, I have registration marks that are on my artboard. So when I print, this actually comes out on the paper itself too. They're cut lines as well as alignment lines. So the pineapples ran through, they were one-sided with two colors. So two passes through the machine. This is going to be double-sided. So I'll have pink and blue, or sorry, pink and C on one side, and then I will have another C on the back side. So it's running through the machine 3 times. So with that, we do need more levels of alignment here registration than the pineapple that I could do by eye and kind of on the fly. So what I like to do, and you do not have to do this because there's multiple ways to do things, is I have my original file and I just brought it straight in to like the box and did it that way. And then I just aligned them all. Once I got it how I wanted to, what I will do is to maintain and keep my same registrations and make sure that the file is the exact same, is I will just go down here to my artboard, and I will go ahead and copy this artboard over. So now I have 2 versions of the same thing. So what I can do here is I know this is going to be my pink level, my pink layer, so I will delete the C. And then over here on the other one, I know this is going to be my C level, C level, and then I will just delete the pink. So I have the proper like alignment and registrations that I need, and all I need to do now is just change the colors to the CMYK black to print. So since these are all grouped together, it's actually really easy to do that. I can just come over here and change my colors. Again, the pop-up doesn't show for you, but I'm changing it to my C0, my M0, my Y0. Oops. My Y0 and my 100. K is 100. So then it just changes to that color that I need it to be. And then something that's important, at least if you're working in Illustrator and probably the other ones, is I'm already working in the document color mode of CMYK. It's perfectly fine if you have RGB. If what you want to do when you send your file is just keep everything all grouped together and set up, we can separate it for you as well too, if you aren't sure with how like your registrations are. I would say having your art mocked up is like the best way to send it to us. if you weren't sure about how to separate your layers like completely. But back to the business cards, I've got this right here. So that's one that's ready to print. And then here I have my navies, and I can do the exact same thing. Make sure I change that over to the CMYK black that I need it to be. So there's that. And then my final color, again, these are all going to be, CMYK black. So for me, it was easiest to change all of my colors and control them that way. But the file type that I have demands a lot of registration. So there's that. But yeah, if you were printing business cards with us, we would have them in this template, and you would get this template. Oh yes, one thing to remember is that when everything is grouped together, they all share the same opacity. So if you had one of these guys that was 50%, one of these guys that was 70%, one of these that was 30%, and you grouped them all together, it would show that they are 100%, but they would still maintain in the group their same opacities. But with that being said, you can adjust them as a group. And so if I click on this, I'm not sure if you can see, but it says that they are 100% up here. Don't do that. Need my properties. Cool, well, it's gone. But yeah, so what would happen is, even though they are all the varying opacities, if you adjusted them as a group, it would still drop it down, even though it might say something like 80. The group as a whole has a shared opacity of 80, but then you're still dropping that 50 down from 50 to lower. So I would say that's something to just be aware of. And if you're wondering why your colors and opacities aren't coming out, that's usually because of that. But yeah, other than that, it's fairly simple. You can always adjust them. You can always play around with them in a vector file than it is in like a raster. But the biggest takeaway when you're preparing your files is just making sure that you have all of the individual color separations that you need and want. So these, we would print these out on 3 individual sheets and scan them 3 individual times for each master that we're making for each individual drum. Yeah. So just for funsies, since this is the Zine Fest, this is also a file of the very first zine that I made, and I was able to make it with the Risograph. So this was the X booklet that is 4x6 and then in 2 colors. So there's 4 individual sheets, including the cover. But it was quite a learning experience for me. I'm glad that I was able to have, I don't know, a new way of thinking how to like print a book and like experiment with that. And like Riso, like I said, really is kind of like the medium for me, and like, wow, I can actually tell stories this way. But how I broke my file is per sheet, really. So I have it per sheet, per side, and then per color. And this is really how I printed all of the individual originals. So I believe it comes out to, it's like 16 pages for 4, because it was double-sided and then 2 colors per side. But yeah. So we've done all this work, but I'm going to say that you don't really know how your art will turn out until it prints. And it's always a nice surprise. So yeah, let's get going. So it looks like our originals printed very well. I'm actually very pleased with it. And for your viewing pleasure, I've gone and printed these beforehand. Well, I mean, yeah, this is pre-recorded, but yeah, they turned out real great. So the first thing you want to do is turn on the machine and put down both trays. That's definitely something that has been forgotten. But yeah, we'll just make sure everything's all set before we get going. Then we'll go ahead and load our paper in. Make sure we have the correct color drum. So we're starting with pink. And then get ready to make our first master. So we'll align that up to whatever is the appropriate notch. And then we'll go ahead and make our master. So we'll go ahead and hit start. And this is actually a very noisy process. And my favorite part. Pew! I usually like to denote which is the first one that comes out of the machine. It's usually not the best one, and then I use it for alignment. And then as far as number of copies go, we usually do smaller batches, usually between 15 and 25. And then I will usually add 2 after that number, just for some wiggle room and alignment. And I usually don't recommend people do less than 15 copies on a machine. Yeah, so don't forget to let your prints dry, clean the rollers, have a snack. This time can range depending on what color you're waiting to dry. Could be 50 minutes, could be overnight. And whenever that time has elapsed, go ahead and do the process again for the next color. So pretend that that drum going in there is C and not blue. And then we just align it back to the same place that we did the first original. Now we'll redo the master making process again for the second color drum. And my favorite part. Pew! So for someone who forgot to put registration marks on their art, this aligned very well. So I went ahead and finished off the rest of the copies of the prints. Since this has C on it on a pretty large amount of the paper, I went ahead and let this sit overnight before we sprayed it with the fixative. And in general, most prints don't need a large amount of fixative at all. It's mostly things that would need to be handled a lot, like business cards or books or different things like that. All right, and that is pretty much it. Yeah, hopefully that gives you some insight into the process. I know that was a whole lot of information. Yeah, please feel free to ask us questions. You can definitely DM us on Instagram or send us an email, or even have a little consultation if you are curious about the process. Yeah, we are always open to collaboration, to experimenting. So if you have an idea and you're not sure, we are definitely down to try it out. But yeah, please don't forget to tune in to all of the other panels and events that are happening with the Phx Zine Fest. Thank you very much, all of the Zine Fest collaborators, for having us join you. Even though we cannot be here, we are pre-recording this. Yeah, we really appreciate it. But yeah, you can reach us all at softxjaws.work, or at Softxjaws on Instagram, as well as SaturnHex.com, at SaturnHex on Insta as well. Yeah, and with that, I will hand it back over to our moderator. But yeah, thank you guys so much.